Today, I'm going to put myself in the shoes of the Benchmark Capital partners and give 5 questions that I would ask founders if I was a partner at Benchmark Capital. So, why I'm doing this, I've obviously studied many hours about Benchmark. If you've listened to the long form Benchmark episode on why they invested in eBay, Uber, and Riot Games, if you've gone to my website, allthingsvc.blog, you've seen how much information I have about Benchmark Capital. In saying that, I think it would be interesting for founders listening to hear 5 questions that could be asked from someone at Benchmark or just from VCs in general. It's just good to think about these questions for your own businesses. And also for investors, if you're listening and you're not currently asking these questions, may give you a little inspiration to ask questions like this or cater the questions you like to ask around trying to get these answers or something that looks like them. So let's jump in. So the first question I'd ask, and this is in no particular order of importance, just how I thought of them. So the first question I'd ask is simply just, who is your customer? And to describe your customer. And so I'd be looking for a few things here. The first thing I'd be looking for is simply whether they actually talk to their customers about their needs, because that is one distinct advantage startups have over incumbents. I was inspired to ask this question from a quote I read from Chetan Puttagunta, current partner at Benchmark Capital. He said, quote, "I think one of the things that early stage companies have an advantage in these particular times is that they're able to engage with their end customers and have meaningful conversations around business value so much more clearly. Because if you're competing against, say, an incumbent that is a public company that is under tremendous pressure to hit quotas or whatever it is, the conversations quickly move to a sales-oriented conversation. Whereas if you're a startup, you all of a sudden have the ability to engage customers exactly along those business value propositions." End quote. So I really like this framework of his because, again, if you think about it, incumbents, large public companies, they have to hit their earnings growth every quarter. They have to hit those numbers. So every conversation with customers is, here's our product. How can we sell it to you? And that's the strategy of the firm. They hire all these sales reps to just sell that product. But if you're a startup, you don't have to take that sales oriented approach. You're not like, here's the product, how do we sell it to you? Because you have the flexibility to be able to adjust the product easily if it's just you and a few people trying to get your first few customers. So your conversations can be, hey, customer A, here's our product. What do you think? And if the customer's like, oh, we currently use this product, we like it a little more because of this feature. So maybe if you add that feature, then we'd be a lot more interested. Startup can go back for 2 weeks, put in that feature, go back to the customer. Now the customer's like, wow, this is awesome. I'm totally going to use your product now. So it's just, startups have that advantage of selling the product on those value propositions rather than just focused on getting the sale done. You can be flexible with your product and change it and cater towards the customer's needs. And so I think that's really important for a startup to do in the early stage to land those early sales. So I'd want to know if the founder is currently doing that. So that'd be the first thing I'm looking for when I ask this question. The second thing I'd be looking for is I'd want to know what makes their customers happy. And a good indicator of product market fit is when their customers stop leaving the product or service. So they wouldn't leave if they're happy. So I'd want to know, what makes them happy, what satisfies their needs. So I got the inspiration for this question from a Sarah Tavel quote. She says, quote, "GMV is not to say that it's not a useful measure, but it's not the thing you want to drive towards." So GMV, for those who don't know, gross merchandise value. Essentially, if you're a marketplace that sells shoes and someone sells a pair of shoes to another person for $100, maybe you take 5% as a company, so your revenue is $5, but the GMV is just the total value of the sale. So that would be the $100 that some person paid another person for. So It's just how companies track overall activity on their platform, essentially. But she says that's not what you should focus on. Instead, you should focus on creating happiness. And she says, happiness to me is something that incorporates the holistic experience that you create for your buyers and your sellers. It's almost the delta in the value you create and the value you capture from your marketplace. And she concludes by saying, product market fit isn't when your users stop complaining, it's when they stop leaving. So I love this framework of happiness is the delta in the value you create and the value you capture. I think that's a really good framework to think about it as founders, because you want to hit that sweet spot of you're giving so much value away to your customers and you're capturing some to build a sustainable business, but you want to hit that perfect sweet spot of we're creating so much value and we're capturing just enough to keep growing, but also to have our customers never leave because we're creating so much value. So that's product market fit. And so I'd want to know, that's the goal of a startup. Once you get there, you should be smooth sailing. So I want to know how the founders intend to get there. Like, I want them to know what makes their customers happy so they can cater towards that and cultivate that value creation and find that perfect delta so they can get that product market fit. So I'd want to know what makes their customers happy. One more thing I'd be looking for in this question is I'd be looking for whether they are driven and scrappy enough to do unscalable things early on. Because being extremely motivated is a key indicator of success for a founder. And depending on how scrappy they are, can be an indicator of how motivated they truly are to build this business into something great. And so this thought came to mind after reading a quote from former Benchmark partner Bill Gurley, where he says, quote, "One of my rules for getting a marketplace off the ground is to do tons of unscalable things. If you took 90% of the entrepreneurs that have been to business school and understand scaling, scaling as in the business gets cheaper to run as it grows. So, for example, retailing, you have to spend $10 for this 100 pack of plywood. I don't know, weird example, but whatever. Not a technology example. $10 for this 100 pack of plywood. Your distributor is willing to give you 1,000 pack of plywood for $80. So instead of paying $100 for 1,000 packs, you pay $80 for 1,000 packs. So like, just that's scaling. Business gets cheaper as it grows. I hope that example works. Anyway, he says how entrepreneurs that have been to business school and understand scaling drives them nuts to do unscalable things. They'll say, oh, we can't do this. How will we ever do that at scale? And Gurley says, we're not going to do it at scale. This is a flywheel. We're trying to get the flywheel spinning. So the cost of our activity today is irrelevant to the marginal cost of the activity down the road, because we're going to stop what we're doing. And he gives an example for Glassdoor, the company that employees can review their employer for prospective job candidates to look at and weigh their options as whether this is a firm they want to work for based on the reviews from employees. And so he says the first company that was reviewed for Glassdoor was Cisco, and the founders went to the Starbucks near Cisco with a pad of paper and interviewed people for reviews. And so there's a 0% chance that's going to be the long-term business effort, but you get to see the market. And those playbooks are precisely built around network effects, doing something very unscalable early on and getting it going bright and growing from strength. And then you have something that's way more alive. So I love this Glassdoor example because the founder of Glassdoor had founded Zillow before. So he's already super rich, had a successful company. He's older. He's in his 40s, I think, maybe late 30s, but very well-established guy. But he's still willing to go to a Starbucks and sit down with some young Cisco employees with a pen and paper and just write down their feelings about their employer from the early on. Like, if some multi-hundred millionaire is willing to do that, you should be willing to do those unscalable things, those most minuscule tasks to get your first users, to understand your market and build from there. And so that's just the scrappiest thing you can do. Again, if you haven't listened to Sequoia episode, we talked about this for Sequoia of how the Airbnb founders went to New York with the minuscule budget they had to interview the few users they had on their platform to understand what they liked about the product and what they could make better. It's just those unscalable things early on to just build on top of the product and to make it better. Those are incredible indicators of success. So I don't know if I'd ask towards, I mean, when I ask who is their customer, I'd hope when they're describing that they'd explain some scrappy thing they did to find out who their customer is. Like, oh, well, we interviewed them at a Starbucks with a pen and paper and we know this about them. Like anything that's scrappy, I would love to hear. So that's what I'd be looking for. Again, to recap on the question, first question would be who is your customer? To describe them, I'd want to know that they talk to their customers, and I'd want to know that they know their customers' value propositions, their needs. I'd want to know what makes their customers happy, and I'd want to see some sense of scrappiness in determining how they know what their customers want, like how they talk to them, how unscalable they're willing to get to talk to their customers and to fine tune their product for their target market. So that's question one. Question number two, I'd ask, what is your distribution advantage? Because an incredible product will never be used if there isn't an effective distribution advantage to it. You can have a great product, but if no one knows about it, it'll never sell. So, if anything, distribution is more important than the product. What I'd be looking for here is I'd want to see if the founders have a unique marketing strategy or unique sales strategy that ideally involves as little paid marketing as possible because that's a slippery slope to go down to keep propping up revenue by paying for it rather than organically, through the product or through the community. I thought about this because I read a Mitch Lasky quote where he says, quote, I resist as long as possible going paid, although sometimes you're so profitable that you can and not really mess up your margins up too much. I think once you start down the paid path for customer acquisition, it's a slippery slope. It's a very difficult thing to come back from because you're almost an addict to it. You're so reliant on it that you start to twist your mental model to believe that you're in this lifetime value return on investment thing that is unhealthy. And so I love this last sentence here because so many people, so many SaaS companies that pay on a per month basis will come up with this lifetime value metric. And so lifetime value is essentially the total amount that customer is going to pay you. So if you charge $1,000 a year for your product and you think you can have that customer for 5 years, so they'll pay you a lifetime value of $5,000. So you should be willing to pay, by that logic, you should be willing to pay anything less than $5,000 for that customer. So you make a profit on it. So some companies will spend $4,000 on customer acquisition to land that $1,000 a year customer. But that's obviously very dangerous because you don't know where technology is going to be in 5 years. They can use your product for a year. All of a sudden, this new, much better technology comes along, and they decide to use that for the next 4 years. So now you just wasted $3,000 on that customer. So going paid and dignifying it with a lifetime value metric that's arbitrary, that no one knows and you can't calculate really, is just a dangerous game to play. So ideally, I'd want the founder to not necessarily have a paid marketing plan. I'd want to hear some kind of unique strategy around marketing. And I'd want the founder to hate paid marketing and not wanting to do it and trying to be as creative as possible to resist paid marketing. Because again, it can just prop up numbers and it doesn't tell you a lot about the product. I'd rather the founder not have a great start in selling the product and knowing that, okay, maybe we have to change something about the product. Maybe we have to change our marketing strategy. Maybe we have to talk to our customers a little more and fine tune things a little bit rather than just, we're going to spend a lot to sell this product and, oh, it must be working because we're making all this revenue. I'd rather see a trickier head start than artificial, propped up head start. So that's what I'd be looking for first. The second thing, this kind of goes in line with what I'm saying. And so I'd want them to also either I'd help them get to this realization, or I'd want them to know that they can't do paid, because even if they go down the paid path, the incumbents will have 100 times or 1,000 times their marketing budget. So they can't outspend them. Their ads are always going to get shown after. So there has to be some type of distribution strategy, like, for example, a community-led marketing strategy. And so I thought of this from another Mitch Lasky quote. He says, quote, King, the video game company behind Candy Crush, he says, quote, King spends nearly $1 billion a year on customer acquisition, and thousands of games are released a month. So how are you, as a games company, going to be able to compete with that if you don't use some community-based marketing? So I love that, because it's just such a simple explanation. Like, you can't do paid because these companies have $1 billion a year customer acquisition budget. Their ads are going to get shown first. They're going to have better ads. They're going to get shown in front of more people. You can't compete with that. So you have to have some type of community-based marketing. You have to, I know for Lattice, the human resources software company, they wrote books about human resources that people working in human resources can read, and tips and everything like that. They had Slack channels for people to discuss, strategies and tips, things that work, things they're struggling with. So they built a community around this book, around these Slack channels. And so there's just got to be some type of community that you're building around that. Like, your product has to be more than just something people pay for. Like, they have to feel something with it. So I think the Lattice is a good example, what I just gave, like thinking about something creative around that. Like Nextdoor, a company I've talked about, not in the benchmark episode, but at my website. And Nextdoor has this community-based marketing because you can't use the product unless 10 people in your neighborhood use it. Essentially, it's a social network for a neighborhood. People can talk about, whatever things they're complaining about in the neighborhood next over. They can say, I need a leaf blower. Does anyone have a leaf blower I could borrow? Just like anything neighborly you can do on that site. But you can only use it if you have 10 people within your neighborhood on the platform. So that's like a community-based marketing, because if they get one person, they're not paying for the other 9. That one person on Nextdoor who signed up is trying to get the other 9 for free for Nextdoor. So that's like that community-based marketing. That's the creative things you can do around getting people on your product rather than having to pay for it, because, again, slippery slope, lifetime value isn't a real metric. You got to be creative around that. So to wrap up again, question number 2 would be, what's your distribution advantage? And what's your strategy around distribution? So number 3, and this is strictly for marketplaces, like an eBay, like an Airbnb, like a StockX, things where there's transactions between one group and another. And so I would ask, how are they incentivizing sellers to be better? I'd want to see some type of Airbnb superhost badge, just any type of motivating factor that makes sellers want to provide a better product or want to provide a better service, to get that reputation that they are a really good seller, to attract more buyers to them, which in turn makes the product more valuable for buyers, because now they know who to work with quickly. They know who to buy from. Again, we'll go into this quote from Sarah Tavel that she explains this incentivizing sellers to be better through Airbnb, like I was kind of just touching on. She says, quote, Airbnb actually introduced the Superhost badge as a way to help their best hosts feel recognized. But in doing so, they codified what makes a great host, reinforcing what hosts need to do to create a great guest experience. So there are 3 positive, superpowering effects of doing this. First, it provides even more clarity to ambitious hosts of what behaviors are expected and rewarded on Airbnb, creating a better experience for guests, even for guests who stay with a newer host who hasn't yet earned a superhost badge. Second, it creates an accruing benefit and mounting loss to hosts. Once they achieve the badge, they get more value on Airbnb from having it, and they don't want to lose it, both leading to more retention of the hosts. And third, guests now have an easy way of knowing who the great hosts are on Airbnb without having to read dozens of reviews, leading to a happier experience. So maybe listen to that twice. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. I'm going to touch on them a little bit now. But first, it lets the sellers know how to be great. If you're a host on Airbnb and you make that your full-time job, you'd want to know how to be the best. You want to strive to be the best host so you can accrue more value for yourself. So by having the superhost badge and having a checklist of what you need to do to earn that badge, that creates a better experience for the seller. They know what they're striving for, so they're going to give a better experience to the buyer to earn that badge. And so the second point she says, it's not just a benefit for everyone. Benefits the seller that they have their badge, benefits the buyer that they know who to buy from. It keeps the sellers from leaving, because if you're on Airbnb and you have this superhost badge and you're getting all this value from it and you have this reputation, why would you go to Verbo? You have this reputation on Airbnb. You're going to stay there and you're going to keep it and want to improve and get better. You wouldn't leave to start fresh somewhere else. You have this reputation. So that's the second point of incentivizing sellers. And then the third, as she says, it makes the buying experience way easier for buyers because they know who the great hosts are without having to read all these reviews and doing all these searches. They can just filter by superhosts in Paris. Boom, there's 5 people, pick their favorite apartment, done. Makes it a lot easier. So just by having some type of incentivizing force in the marketplace, like wanting the sellers to be better, it usually starts with the sellers, because if the sellers are better, the buying experience is better for the buyers. So you want to be thinking about, how can I motivate these sellers to be best? How can I reward them for their hard work, which in turn would make the buying experience better, like I said. So I'd simply ask, how are they incentivizing sellers to be better? And there might not be something they know at this point if they're an early stage company. Like, I don't know when Airbnb started the superhost badge, but it wasn't early on when they had 100 hosts. So they might not know, but at least it's a good thought exercise. And if you're a marketplace, so much now. You should have been studying Airbnb and eBay and all these great marketplaces. So you should have some type of thinking around that, or else you're just not prepared. So it's a reasonable question to ask, I'd say, and I'd hope there'd be some type of answer, at least around a long-term plan to incentivize sellers if they aren't doing anything right now. And so question number 4, I would simply ask, what do you know about the industry that others don't? And so I'd be looking for what Eric Vishria, current partner at Benchmark, calls that magic insight. Something the founders know that very few people know, and they're able to take advantage of that to build a product or service. So there has to be some type of distinctiveness for their business for it to be successful, obviously. So I got this from an Eric Vishria quote. He says, having that insight, that's the part where you're sitting in the meeting, you're 3 minutes in, and the founder says something that you've never heard anywhere else. Nobody has said it. Nobody's put a blog post down on it. It's an insight. And that insight is the magic. And so based on that quote, you could be thinking, well, this isn't really something you ask. Ideally, it's something that organically comes up in the meeting, which if it does, if I'm sitting there listening to the founder and they say something where I'm like, whoa, especially me, I've researched this stuff however many hours a week. If there's something I've never heard before, I would be like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, how did this person think of that? And so then I'd engage about it, be like, let's go back to what you just said. Like, how did you think of that? Like, what led you to get to that point because that's really interesting and really important. And so ideally that comes organically. If I didn't really hear like that totally unique thing that I've never heard before, then I'd ask, what do you know about the industry that others don't? Because I'd want the founder to have some type of mental strategic advantage when going into this business because they're starting from way down. Like there has to be something unique that they're able to propel themselves up with. So essentially that hovers around what do you know about the industry that others don't? And I'd be looking for that just completely unique insight. And so last question, number 5. This one's really benchmark specific because they really believe in good founder VC relationships. And so I would ask the founder, what are you looking for in an investor? And I specifically say investor. I wouldn't say partner or like something where it hints that I want them to say. But say, what are you looking for in an investor? Because I'd be looking for a founder that doesn't just want capital. If they're an experienced founder, this is their second or third time, then maybe that's okay. They know what they're doing. But still, I'd want someone who is just a serial learner and understands they don't have all the answers and never turns down support, ideally, even if they're a multiple time founder. Because people like that, those serial learners, those ones always looking for an edge, like that's typically born with that. You don't lose it. So I got this idea from a quote from current benchmark partner, Sarah Tavel. She has a lot of great insights. She says, quote, there are founders for whom getting the cheapest capital at that financing and no board seat. There's some founders for whom that's the right fit. We don't need to play for that founder. What we want is the founder who is going to be thinking about that decision on a decade-long journey that they're going to go on, and that they want to build the best because they're that competitive person who knows that they don't have all the answers, that wants to be surrounded by the best people they possibly can at every step of the way. And so I love this thinking. I love this quote because, yeah, I'd want a founder that is always looking to learn, understands they don't have all the answers, and wants to surround themselves with just the smartest, most interesting, counterintuitive thinking people they can find. And so that's a great thing to have in an investor because that's someone you're meeting with for board meetings on a quarterly basis, or someone you can just randomly call up, or someone who will randomly call you up just to kick around ideas and hash out things you're thinking of or things you're stressed about. Just I'd want someone who's always looking to learn rather than just getting money and going off on their own. And so this kind of ties into the second point, which is I'd want the founder to have a willingness to be vulnerable and ask for help or admit that they don't know the answers and need help receiving it. So I thought of this from a Peter Fenton quote. He says, quote, when I've worked with my founders, I want to make sure that the vulnerability is not only tolerated, but it's really important as the fabric of our connection. You should feel like it doesn't get met with judgment and condemnation, but rather validation of the bad feelings that sometimes come with it. But then a constructive partner who's there to say, okay, what are we going to do about it? And so this ties into the first point about just not having all the answers, but you need someone to admit that they don't have all the answers, that vulnerability to say, I don't know what to do about this. I have this customer who is my biggest customer and they want to lead to go this other product. I don't know how to change their mind. Like, I need help around that. And so again, I'd want, as an investor, I'd want to be trusted by that founder to be able to help them get through this hurdle rather than the founder feeling like they can't tell me that, they can't express that vulnerability because they're scared that they'll be condemned for it and the investor will be mad, oh, you're about to lose my money because you don't know how to solve this. Like, that's not a good partnership, which these investor founder relationships should be. They should be partnerships. So there should be a feeling of vulnerability on both sides about when things are going wrong to get it all on the table and then start at square one to try to solve them. And so this goes into one last point, which is just, again, having that candid relationship with their investors. No one's afraid to disagree with one another. In fact, I'd want a relationship where debate is encouraged and constant devil's advocate thinking is encouraged so that the best decisions can be made. I'd want a founder that isn't a yes man or a no man, but more of a debate partner. And so I thought of this from a Miles Grimshaw quote, current Benchmark partner. He talks about how he wants him and his founders to disagree, not enduringly disagree, but to disagree. And he says, quote, "People talk about being founder friendly, and I never really like that term. It feels apathetic. And I think if you have a founder friendly mentality, you're sort of scared of that, of disagreement." Jack Altman, the CEO of Lattice, or recently former CEO of Lattice, founder of Lattice, Jack and I would sometimes say to each other, "Do you want me to be supportive or honest?" Sometimes you just want the support, but I think of that as founder respect versus founder friendly. And I think if you have that respect and you're oriented to the greatness as possible, you have a responsibility to challenge, to try and pose the alternative, to try and make the implicit more explicit, to try and frame the trade off so Jack's main decisions are more harshly to provoke clarity of thinking, at least for the best decision. And so, again, I'd want someone who is a debate partner. I'd want someone who is open to being challenged on their ideas, to hash out everything. Like if they come with me with an idea and I challenge it, maybe I'm wrong to challenge it. Maybe, we talk about that. We're like, oh, that's interesting. You brought it up. Here's why I think it's wrong. And then I'm wrong for challenging that. That's great. But also, if I challenge something, I'd want the founder to be like, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And then can, incorporate that into their next strategy. Again, just I'd want the founder to want me as a partner, as an investor, not just capital. I'd want to be a partner. I want to be someone they can trust and be vulnerable with and be able to be a debate partner, have candid conversations, and really not hold anything back. So, and I think it requires a lot of mental maturity to act this way. And you want, mental mature founders because they're going to have a really hard life the next 10 years. So you want someone who's mentally strong and emotionally strong. So I'd want to know, what are you looking for in an investor? I'd want them to express that they'd want someone who's a partner and they'd want help and they'd want to learn, because I think that's just the best way to grow and the best way to develop, which they're going to need to do as they scale their business from $0 to $1 billion. Like you have to learn to get to that point. So that's what I'd be looking for. Again, 5 questions from a Benchmark Capital perspective. Number 1, who is your customer? Describe them. Number 2, what is your distribution or marketing advantage? Number 3, if you're a marketplace, how are you incentivizing sellers to be better? Number 4, what's that magic insight? What do you know about the industry that others don't know? And number 5, what are you looking for in an investor? Those would be the 5 questions I would ask if I'm a Benchmark partner. I'm curious if they ask questions similar to this, because it seems like they would. After all, I got all these quotes that relate to these questions. So hopefully that helps you as a founder, tune your answers or start thinking about these strategies or thinking about these questions, thinking about what investors might be looking for in answers to questions. Hopefully, as a VC, you have learned a thing or two. Maybe you've added one of these questions to your investment meetings. I don't know, but I think there's a lot of good stuff on here. Hope you enjoyed this episode. So just like every podcast, there's also going to be a written version of this on my Substack. I'll also put all these questions and my brief bullet point thinking around why I'd ask them on my website, allthingsvc.blog. Link to Substack will be in the show notes. Link to the website will be in the show notes. I'll also probably post some type of YouTube video about this. It's going to be the same exact thing as the podcast, just with video. If you'd like to watch it instead, I'll link that in the show notes as well. But yeah, I hope you took a lot out of this. This is fun to talk about, for me at least. So let me know what you think of these questions. You can message me on Twitter. That'll be in the show notes at Justin_Pryor_. So let me know what you think. There'll be more of these to come, certainly. So thanks for listening. Hope you like this episode. Take care.